Before the drums, there was silence. Then, at the exact moment of first light, the sound arrived. Not a church bell, not a rooster, a drum. 108 strikes rolling out from the bell and drum towers at the center of Chang'an, the largest city on earth. 1 million people stirred. Ward gates swung open. Streets that had been sealed since dusk filled within minutes. The smell came next. Charcoal smoke and sesame oil, wet stone and animal dung, and underneath it all, something that had traveled 3,000 miles, frankincense, carried in from Persia along the Silk Road that ended here, in this city, on this morning. This is what a day looked like in 750 AD at the center of the world. The day in Chang'an did not begin with choice. It began with the drums. The Tang state divided the capital into roughly 110 wards, walled residential and commercial districts, each sealed at dusk and reopened at dawn by official order. Miss the closing, and there were consequences. The ward system was not a suggestion. Inside the wards, the waking hour depended entirely on rank. For the officials of the imperial court, it was still dark when they rose. Robes arranged with care, sashes tied in a specific sequence, colors that could not be changed on a whim. Every shade of silk worn in public carried legal meaning. A deep crimson robe signified rank above a certain level. Wearing the wrong color was not a fashion error. It was an offense. For the craftspeople and traders in the outer wards, the morning was less ceremonial. A brazier lit, water heated over charcoal, a face washed with cold water from a ceramic basin. Clothing was linen or hemp for most. Silk was expensive enough that wearing it outside one's permitted rank had been, at various points in Tang history, explicitly forbidden by imperial decree. What no one possessed was a private space as the modern world understands it. Extended families shared compounds. The walls between households were thick, but the sounds carried. The smell of the morning meal in one courtyard reached the next. The city woke as a single organism, ward by ward, outward from the palace at its center. By the time full light reached the eastern wards, the streets were already moving. The harder work was still ahead. The primary labor of the day in Chang'an was not farming. This was the distinction that separated it from almost every other settlement in the known world. A significant portion of the population performed work that had nothing to do with food production. Scholars copying texts, artisans producing ceramics for export, weavers managing silk looms that required years of practice to master. The civil examination system was already centuries old by 750 AD. Historians believe it was among the most rigorous meritocratic structures the ancient world had produced. Candidates from across the empire arrived in Chang'an to sit examinations in classical poetry, governance, and law. A successful result could lift an entire family's social position by a generation. Failure meant returning home and beginning again. Some candidates sat the examination for a decade without passing. For those outside the examination halls, the labor was physical and without pause. Archaeological evidence from the period suggests that the kilns producing Tang-style glazed ceramics operated continuously, workers managing temperatures that could not be allowed to drop without destroying weeks of accumulated work. The three-colored lead glaze, amber, green, and white, that defines the period, required precise knowledge passed down through workshops across generations. The Silk Road did not run itself. The caravans arriving at Chang'an's western gates carried not only goods but information, prices, political conditions, trade routes, the location of water sources across the desert. The people who tracked this intelligence worked from the first hour of the morning. The West Market opened its gates. What happened inside was something the city's founders had not entirely anticipated. The first substantial meal came mid-morning, after the opening hours of labor were done. What it contained depended almost entirely on geography and income. In the northern wards, millet and wheat dominated. Steamed breads, flatbreads cooked directly on a griddle, thick noodles dressed with fermented sauces. These were the staples for working households. In the southern reaches of the empire, rice was more common, but Chang'an sat in the north, in the Wei River Valley, and the grain that fed the city was millet. There were no potatoes, no chili peppers, no tomatoes. None of the crops that would later become central to Chinese cuisine had yet arrived on the continent. What the table held instead was fermented soybean paste, pickled vegetables, dried fish, and for wealthier households, pork. Tea existed and was consumed, though historians believe it was still a relatively expensive commodity in the north by 750 AD, more commonly found among officials and monks than among ordinary workers. The meal was eaten with chopsticks from ceramic bowls. The ceramics themselves were objects of considerable craft, some of the finest produced anywhere in the world at that moment. A bowl used for a morning meal in a middle-ranking Chang'an household was technically superior to almost anything produced in Europe at the same period. The Silk Road traders in the western wards ate differently. Lamb, flatbread, dried fruit, and spices that had traveled from Central Asia. The smell from the market stalls distinguished one district from another entirely. When the bowls were cleared, the city was already deep in its social life. The West Market of Chang'an was not merely a place to exchange goods. Evidence from the period suggests it functioned as a city within the city, a zone where the usual rules of Tang social hierarchy operated differently, where a Sogdian merchant and a Tang official might share the same narrow lane, where transactions were conducted in half a dozen languages before noon. The traders who filled the Western market had come from Persia, from the kingdoms of Central Asia, from the Indian subcontinent. They brought glass, lapis lazuli, horses, cotton, and spices. They also carried religions. Buddhism had been present in China for centuries, but the Tang capital also contained functioning Zoroastrian temples, a Nestorian Christian community, and by the mid-8th century, a small but established Muslim population. The city absorbed them. Historians note that this degree of religious coexistence was unusual even by the standards of a cosmopolitan imperial capital. A common assumption about Tang society is that women were largely confined to domestic roles. The evidence from this specific period complicates that view considerably. Court records and surviving literary accounts describe women riding horses, competing in polo matches, participating in public festivals, and in certain cases, holding administrative functions. The Tang era is notable precisely because some boundaries that would tighten significantly in later dynasties were, in 750 AD, still permeable. By midday, the tea houses near the examination halls were full. Scholars who had not yet passed their examinations gathered to compose verse, not for recreation, but because poetic skill was itself one of the measures by which a candidate's worth was formally assessed. The poems produced in these rooms sometimes survived for centuries. Most did not survive the week. The afternoon deepened. The markets began to slow. Somewhere behind the drum towers, the city was already counting down to dusk. The evening meal was the largest of the day, and in most households, the most communal. Extended families gathered in the main hall of the compound. The courtyard arrangement of Tang domestic architecture placed this room at the center, with smaller quarters arranged around it on 3 or 4 sides. Food was served in shared vessels. Individual portions were not the custom. People reached across the table. Music was present in the city at night in a way that had few equivalents elsewhere in the ancient world. Written records describe the performance of instruments that had themselves traveled the Silk Road. The pipa, a lute with Persian origins, had by 750 AD become one of the defining instruments of Tang court music and popular entertainment alike. Performers worked the markets and tea houses, not only the palace. The oral tradition in this period coexisted with something newer. Woodblock printing had been in practice for several decades by 750 AD. Texts that had previously existed only in handwritten copies could now be reproduced in larger numbers. Monks used the technology to distribute Buddhist sutras. Knowledge that had previously required a specific location, a monastery library, a scholar's private collection, was beginning, slowly, to move. But for most people on an ordinary evening in Chang'an, the evening was about the voices in the room. Stories moved the way they always had, from the people who remembered to the people who would need to. Children learned what the city had been before they were born. They would carry it forward. The drums would sound again soon. The drum towers sounded their 108 strikes at dusk. Every ward gate in the city closed. From that moment until the morning drums, movement through the streets was illegal. This was not a loose rule. The curfew was enforced by patrols that moved through the major avenues, the broad north-south and east-west arteries that divided the city into its famous grid. Being found outside a ward after closing, without documented authorization, meant arrest. The consequences were serious enough that most people did not test them, and yet evidence from the period suggests the curfew was never truly total. Near the markets, in the alleys between official wards, informal trade continued into the darkness. The illegal night market that operated in the shadow of the West Market was an open secret, documented obliquely in administrative records that noted its suppression repeatedly across multiple years, which suggests its equally repeated return. What could not be sold in daylight found buyers after dark. Sleep, when it came, was communal by necessity. Wealthy households had dedicated sleeping quarters. For most others, people slept in the same rooms where they worked and ate, on wooden beds with lacquered frames, under silk or hemp blankets according to their means. The streets outside were dark in a way no modern city has experienced. No gas lamps, no electric light, no ambient glow from neighboring buildings. Only fire, behind walls, behind closed gates. The patrol passed. The alley went quiet. Somewhere in the Western District, a lamp burned later than it should have, and then the city was still, until the drums came again, and another day began. Chang'an in 750 AD was demolished, rebuilt, renamed, and eventually reduced to a fraction of its original footprint. The ward system that organized it was dismantled. The Silk Road that fed it declined. The dynasty that built it fell within 60 years of this day. But the things produced here during this period did not disappear. The civil examination system that filled its tea houses with aspiring scholars persisted, in modified form, for over 1,000 years, shaping the structure of Chinese governance long after the Tang itself was gone. The woodblock printing, refined in its monasteries, spread across the continent and eventually reached Europe. The ceramics produced in its kilns set technical standards that defined the possible in that medium for centuries. The city that stood here produced poetry that is still memorized by school children today. It absorbed a dozen religions without eliminating any of them. It fed 1 million people from a single grid, organized by law and maintained by labor that most of those people never questioned, because it was simply what life required. What is worth knowing about Chang'an is not how different it was. It is how much of what was built here is still, in some form, present. They had no antibiotics, no protection from epidemic disease which moved through a city of 1 million people with catastrophic speed when it arrived. No way to communicate across the empire faster than a horse could travel. What they had was a system, an examination, a market, a grid of streets and ward walls that held an extraordinary concentration of human life in one place and made it function. That system did not fail from within. It held for generations. The knowledge it produced, the poetry, the legal frameworks, the ceramic techniques, the mapped trade routes, survived the dynasty's fall entirely. Some of it is still in circulation. None of the people who built it knew that it would last that long. They built it anyway. Every scene in this video was created using modern AI technology, rebuilt from Tang Dynasty historical records, archaeological excavations, and period accounts drawn from the Dunhuang manuscripts and Tang administrative texts. No real footage exists, but the history is real, and this is what it might have looked like. If this brought that world to life for you, subscribe, and I will keep rebuilding it.